Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of ELT Tips and Tricks, a new podcast dedicated to you teachers to help you teach beginner students English as a foreign language. Last episode was all about the fear of speaking, so if you didn't get the chance to listen to it, please make sure you do. As for today's episode, it's about reading skills, so let's jump right into it. Before I start with my tips, I'd like every time to put ourselves as teachers in our students' shoes. So, let's imagine that you're going to learn a new language. Let's say Chinese. Obviously, not an easy language. So you're going in your first or second class and you're asked to read Chinese, which sounds a bit outrageous. You're looking at symbols and you can't figure out what do they mean. So obviously you're anxious, and if you're worried, you're not sure, should I know these words or should I know what they mean? So obviously this is how your student, especially beginner students, feel when you ask them to read a small text or small paragraph in English. Comparing Chinese to English is a bit extreme, I know, but for us as language teachers, as English teachers, imagining dealing with Chinese is exactly the same way how our students feel when they deal with English texts. So in order for our students to become fluent readers, we as teachers have to help them by teaching them some skills. When they develop these skills, they become good readers. So today in this episode, I'll be talking about two most famous skills or sub-skills, and they are skimming and scanning. So I'll start with skimming first. So what's skimming? Let's define it. So skimming is a sub-skill for reading. Brilliant. So how do we do that? So obviously we know that skimming is running our eyes quickly through a reading text to know the main idea of it. Okay, so asking lower level students to do that is not easy for them, obviously. So how for them is, how do I do it? I'm not really sure of all the meaning of the words. I don't know each and every word in the text. So to ask them to run their eyes quickly through a reading text is still confusing for a lower level students. So there are many features in the text that will help students get the idea of the text or the main idea of the text, and they won't struggle as much when they read it. And if they don't know the meaning of the most of the words, or it will be totally fine because it won't hinder their understanding of the general main idea, or it won't be a problem with the when they answer later questions about the text. The question is, what are these features? So when you give students reading from a textbook, so these textbooks usually have units and lessons, and these units usually have themes. So let's say food or weather or celebrities, for example. So when you give them a text, these texts have pictures that accompanies the text. And so if you were talking about food, it would be probably like a bowl of fruits and vegetables. And if you're talking about like weather, so you have pictures of summer and winter, autumn and spring. And if you're talking about famous celebrities or celebrities in general, find a picture of Tom Cruise, for example. So the first thing you would ask your students to do is to look at the pictures. So when they do look at the picture, they don't need to understand the language because picture speaks for themselves. There's no language for the picture, and if they can't speak English, that's absolutely fine because pictures speak for themselves, and pictures will give them a small idea of what the text will be about. So the second thing to do is to ask students to read titles of the texts. So any articles, any small text, usually have titles. So you ask students to read this title before, of course, going into the text. So by reading the title, they will now have more idea of what the text will be about. So yes, if they're struggling to understand the words in the title, you can follow it up by questions just to make sure that all your students are on the same page. They all understand initially what the text they're about to read is about. Okay, brilliant. So students now know about 30 to 40% of what the text is about. So the third thing to do, or the third thing to ask them to do, in order for students to be able to skim the text and know what's it about and start answering questions, is to find the topic sentence in each paragraph. So obviously you teach them what a topic sentence is, and knowing that the topic sentence represents the main idea of each paragraph, it would be much easier for the students to navigate in the text and know the whole text main idea easily. So beginner students' text usually have the topic sentence in the paragraphs at the first sentence of each paragraph. So you ask students to go read each paragraph now and find the topic sentence, and by finding it they find the main idea of each paragraph. So now the students have an idea of the main idea of the text, and now they understand the text. Let's say they understand 70 or 80% of the text. So that won't be a problem for them to answer questions later, and if they don't know most of the words, they won't panic. They don't need to translate each and every word. So every time you go in class and you ask students to skim a text, that's the way to do it. You break it down into steps. This episode is scanning. So let's define it. Scanning is to run your eyes quickly to find specific information in a reading text. For example, figures or names. So after the student is introduced to a reading text and is able to skim it to know the main idea, students then can scan the text to extract specific information. For instance, let's say you gave your students a reading text about the weather in Canada, and you ask them to answer some questions. Let's say one of the questions is, what's the coldest month in Canada? So how would you advise your students to answer this question, or how would you advise your students to scan a text? The first thing you ask students to do is to read the question before jumping into the text to find the answer. Just read the question carefully first. Then ask them to determine which paragraph they would find the answer. And this shouldn't be a problem because they've already had an idea of what each paragraph is about from the topic sentence and from skimming it quickly. Finally, ask them to run their eyes through the text or through the paragraph to find the answer. In this case, you know that the answer is a name of a month. So they know which paragraph and they know what they're looking for. They're looking for a name of a month. Alright, so they look quickly for a name of the month and they find it and they write down their answer. So, that was today's episode. Today's episode is all about teaching your students skills, 2 sub-skills to be specific, skimming and scanning. By teaching them both of these skills each time, repetition is a key here. Every time they read a text, you break it down into steps. And by the end of your course, students won't have a problem reading at all. That's it for today's episode. It was all about making it easier for your beginner students to read text without the fear of not knowing most of the words. So breaking it into steps and repeating these steps every time you enter your class is a key. Repetition is a key. it will make it so much easier for your students to read and actually enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening, and for next episode, it's all about listening skills. So stay tuned. Thank you so much. Bye.